From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Ladies and gentlemen, a video message from the 14th Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden.
Good evening, and thank you for joining the library on this special night remembering Denis Johnson, recipient of the 2017 Prize for American Fiction. I'm sorry I can't be there with you, but I know it will be a memorable conversation with these extraordinary authors. The Library of Congress honors a writer's lifetime achievement with the Fiction Prize at the National Book Festival each year. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity to share with you some news about this year's event on Saturday, September 1st. Once again, this celebration of books and reading will feature some of the biggest names in every genre. In history, I'm thrilled to announce that former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright will join us. Also, Doris Kearns Goodwin, John Meacham, and Ron Chernow. Best-selling author Amy Tan will discuss her new memoir, Where the Past Begins. Dave Eggers, Jennifer Egan, and Isabel Allende will all be with us. And children's author and Pulitzer Prize winner Junot Diaz will join us. Our U.S. Poet Laureate Tracy K. Smith and National Ambassador for Young People's Literature Jacqueline Woodson will be there too. This is just a hint at the things to come. More names will be announced soon. I hope to see you there.
Please welcome the Director of National and International Outreach, Dr. Jane McAuliffe.
Good evening. As you've just heard, I'm Jane McAuliffe, the Director of National and International Outreach here at the library. On behalf of all of my colleagues, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Stories from a Fallen World, the Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction tribute to Denis Johnson. Tonight is the third in what has become an annual celebration of the prize and its winners. And I know that we all find pleasure in the fact that in today's hectic world, we can pause and take an evening to recognize the power of literature to change our perceptions. Along with our poet laureate, the Prize for American Fiction stands as the library's highest honor to an American writer. It seeks to commend strong, unique, enduring voices who have told us something new about the American experience. Denis Johnson certainly deserves the honor. As last year's prize winner, Marilyn Robinson, has said about him, "I have never known a writer who was so identical with his work, whose thoughts and passions and energies were so entirely of one substance with the world he remade as fiction." The great energy of his imagination was a fusion of honesty and seriousness, pain and laughter. His life was a thing of moment and urgency, pure and undistracted. Denis left us too soon, but we have an amazing group of his writing peers, literary and journalistic, here with us tonight to help celebrate his life and work. It should be a fascinating discussion that reflects in strikingly different ways the gritty themes that course through his stories. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize Cindy Johnson, Denis's widow, and his daughter, Lana Burke. We're so very glad that you could join us this evening. I'd also like to recognize Avida Bashirad, Deputy Publisher of Random House. Random House is the proud publisher of Denis's work. Now, please let me welcome my colleague, John Haskell, to the stage to tell you just a bit about one of our hosts this evening, the John W. Kluge Center here at the library. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you all for coming. The Kluge Center is proud to be co-sponsor of this event. It's a continuation of a collaboration we've had with the Poetry and Literature Center to celebrate the winners in the Prize for American Fiction. The tribute to this particular literary giant fits perfectly into the Kluge Center's mission, which is to be a bridge between scholars and writers on the one hand and policymakers and the interested public on the other. And that's to foster a continuing conversation of the challenges facing democracies in the 21st century. Before we get to the program, I want to give a quick shout out to the National Endowment for the Humanities, who's gotten the word out to a lot of you about this event, and also to thank them for the work they do in collaboration with the library. Right now we have a brief video featuring Denis Johnson.
English words are like prisms, empty, nothing inside, and still they make rainbows. So says a character in Already Dead, a novel by the late, great American writer Denis Johnson. Johnson's stories, as legions of his fans know, are also prisms. They are hard, merciless, flinty, and yet they too make rainbows. He's been called a writer's writer, and for all the enigma of that string of words, they hold a simple truth. Those who bring language to life recognize Johnson's gifts instantly. Louis Erdrich calls his work profound and transcendent. Jonathan Franzen finds his sentences miracles of transparency and tone. Philip Roth calls him daring, terrifying, and an emissary for tortured, broken souls. Marilyn Robinson marvels that a writer's personal passions and energies can be so inextricably wedded to his words. All agree, Denis Johnson has managed to give us minimalist, yet distinctly ecstatic and hallucinatory rainbow prose. He is an American original. He was born in 1949 in Munich, Germany, and raised in Tokyo and Manila, the child of American diplomats. As a teenager, moving back to Washington, D.C. during the tumultuous 60s, he came to know the country and the restless characters he would capture so vividly in his fiction. He graduated in English literature from the University of Iowa and earned an MFA from the Iowa Writers' Workshop, where he returned as a teacher. He has also taught at Texas State University and the University of Texas at Austin. In the course of his fevered career, he published novels, short stories, journalism, and poetry. Among his best-known works are those about the flotsam and jetsam of American life: The Laughing Monsters, Nobody Move, Tree of Smoke, Already Dead, Jesus' Son, Resuscitation of a Hanged Man, The Stars at Noon, Fiscadoro, Angels. He's received numerous awards for these, including a National Book Award, a Lannan Fellowship in Fiction, a Whiting Writers Award, and in 2008, he was named a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Throughout, he has chronicled an America that has gone unobserved, unrecorded. Here are our drug addicts, our war veterans, our disaffected, our used up and left behind. And yet the most affecting and rewarding aspect of Denis Johnson's fiction is that in work after work, he has proved that beauty often lurks in unexpected places, that strength can be found in failure, that the human spirit is a fragile but resilient vessel. His is a very American story. He once described his works as pressure cookers of language, his characters as those who inhabit life's perilous edge. As time wore on, he found that he himself was all too vulnerable to these human frailties. When the Librarian of Congress, Carla Hayden, offered Denis Johnson the Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction in March of 2017, he wrote in an email message, "My head is spinning from such great news." 2 months later, tragically, he was dead. The library is very proud to honor posthumously this extraordinary human being and writer whose contributions to the American canon have been lasting and invaluable. As the librarian wrote when the prize was announced in June 2017, Denis Johnson was a writer for our times. In prose that fused grace with grit, He spun tale after tale about our walking wounded, the demons that haunt, the salvation we seek. We emerge from his imagined world with profound empathy, a different perspective, a little changed. We're very proud to count Denis Johnson among the distinguished winners of the Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Marie Arana, and I have the privilege of serving as the literary advisor to the Library of Congress and to the Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden. One of my most rewarding responsibilities is directing the jury that governs this distinguished award, the Library of Congress Prize for American Fiction. In that capacity, I get to work with wonderful scholars like the ones you've just heard, Jane McAuliffe and John Haskell, as well as the head of the Poetry and Literature Center, Rob Casper, whom you'll meet at the end of the program. Every year, a jury of 27 distinguished literary critics, Nobel laureates in literature, Man Booker Award winners, former winners of this prize, put forward 3 American authors they think most deserving. The Librarian of Congress makes the final selection. The purpose of that award is spelled out on the back of your programs, is to commend strong, unique, enduring voices that throughout long, consistently accomplished careers have told us something new about the American experience. Past awardees have been Herman Wouk, Philip Roth, Isabel Allende, Don DeLillo, E.L. Doctorow, Louis Erdrich, John Grisham, Marilyn Robinson, and Toni Morrison. The choice of our 10th prize winner, Denis Johnson, made by Dr. Hayden in March of last year, and then confirmed in a prize ceremony in September, was especially thrilling for me, as I've been a dedicated fan of Denis's work since I stumbled onto Resuscitation of a Hanged Man back in the early 90s, when I was a little younger than I am now, and found myself bowled over by his language, its emotional force, its precision. As one reviewer wrote, quote, "His novels, like poems, seem to be written line to line," unquote. But the full power of his stories transcends even his considerable prose mastery. Denis's stories land like a swift punch, somewhere between gut and heart. The last time I spoke to Denis, it was on the phone, trying to persuade him to be here tonight. He had been so delighted by Dr. Hayden's call and the news that he was the chosen honoree. I exchanged emails with him just after that call. But he was also an immensely private man. He didn't like public expressions of admiration. Indeed, he had been conveniently away in some war zone reporting a story when the National Book Award was conferred on him 10 years before for his devastatingly powerful work, Tree of Smoke. I tried valiantly to argue my case that he should join us here, that he didn't need to do much. Just come, sit out there in the audience with all of you and be lauded and celebrated and given his due for being one of the great American literary figures of our time. He was polite, he was friendly, he let me talk and talk. That phone call, which lasted a good long while as I remember, and during which I felt with every passing minute that my powers of persuasion were failing me, ended with, I don't think so. He just couldn't bring himself to do it. That was on May 18th, 2017. 6 days later, he was gone. Now we're here, gathering to honor him in his absence. Thinking about how best to celebrate Denis, we decided that what might please him most, given his gimlet-eyed view of public expressions of admiration, might be to turn our lights in the other direction. We decided to pay tribute to him by honoring others in his name, choosing 3 exemplary American writers whose works reflect in one way or another the themes that are so present in Denis's work. They would be excellent writers at the top of their form, very different practitioners of the craft, 3 greats who, like Denis, tell stories, fiction or nonfiction. Stories of the fallen world. The human costs of addiction, for instance. The terrible fog of war. The essential alienation and disconnectedness that define modern-day America. If we do this right, tonight you'll see a little bit of Denis and his obsessions in all 3 of these brilliant wordsmiths. I'd like to tell you something about each right up front, right here, before we sit down, in reverse order of their appearance, so that when I actually bring them on, the last shall be the first. Let me start in that spirit with someone who will actually follow the writers. She is Elizabeth Cuthrell, a very accomplished film producer who wrote and produced the film version of Jesus' Son, that stark, searing, often funny, quirkily funny, collection of stories for which Denis is probably best known. Elizabeth is co-founder of Even Star Films, an independent film and theater production company. She's turned out numerous prize-winning movies as well as acclaimed theater productions on both coasts. She also produced a stunning series of public service announcements called Stop the Hate, urging racial tolerance, for which she won the Courage Award. We're especially very grateful to Elizabeth for coming to share with us her long-time friendship with Denis Johnson. Sam Quinones is the author of Dreamland, a true masterpiece of investigative journalism about the opioid crisis and the widespread addiction that has ravaged small-town America and the heartland. His book is powerful, absorbing, urgent, a monumental achievement that drills down on the harsh realities that Denis described so memorably in fiction. The winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award, a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize, and named one of the best books of 2015, it's a book every American should read. A book that tracks a spiraling drug trade, a voracious, unfettered pharmaceutical industry, and hundreds of thousands of lives strewn along the way. We're very lucky to have Sam with us tonight. Elliot Ackerman, a United States Marine, served 5 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan and is the recipient of the Silver Star, the Bronze Star for Valor, and the Purple Heart. His essays and short stories have appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The New Republic, among many others. His first book, Green on Blue, is a harrowing, brutal, utterly absorbing novel about an Afghan orphan trapped in the savage fog of war. Elliot's second novel, Dark at the Crossing, published just last year, is about a young Arab American caught in the Syrian conflagration. The novel was a finalist for the National Book Award and named one of the best books of 2017. He'll publish a new novel this fall called Waiting for Eden, about an American veteran home from the war, drastically damaged in mind, spirit, and body. Elliot, it's great to have you here. Jonathan Franzen, our first guest tonight, is renowned for plumbing the depths of the modern American psyche. He is a past master at the essential loneliness and anxiety that permeates contemporary life and the wild, careening twists of fate that can throw it all out of whack and send it spinning. John's talent for forming striking narratives out of ordinary life is abundantly evident in his work, most recently in his richly imagined novel, Purity, which has been called his most fleet-footed, intimate novel yet. If some authors are masters of suspense, others postmodern verbal acrobats, Publishers Weekly wrote, and still others complex character pointillists, few excel in all three arenas. John is the author of 4 other novels, among them Freedom and the Corrections, for which he won a National Book Award and numerous other prizes, and 5 works of nonfiction and translation. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please welcome Jonathan Franzen. So I'd like to start with a quote, John, if everyone can hear me. Can I be heard? Yes? This is from Sam Tannenhouse at the New York Times. He said, Franzen cracks open the opaque shell of postmodernism, tweezes out its tangled circuitry, and inserts in its place the warm, beating heart of an authentic humanism.
That was nice of Sam.
He writes with equal fluency on equity finance, railroad engineering, currency manipulation in Eastern Europe, the neurochemistry of clinical depression. But the data flows through the arteries of narrative, attending to the quiet drama of interior life and recording its fraught transactions with the public world. Now that is a pretty big, tall order. John, you write about dysfunctional families. Small American worlds that are exploded really by large events. I think I can summarize your work that way. And the humdrum of quiet lives that are suddenly ripped to shreds by foreign events or economic busts or missed communications or happenstance. What brings you to those subjects?
Sheer desperation, that's kind of what you face every morning in the office. First of all, thank you all for coming. I never do these things. There's only one writer I would have done this for, and that's Denis Johnson, because he has a unique place, actually, in the world of American literature. He's the one writer who every writer I know can quote multiple lines from verbatim. They're often very funny lines, which is something I hope we don't lose sight of, as that Denis was one of the funniest writers we had. Laugh out loud funny, precisely because he was so close to the edge. It's an honor to be here, and I'm so glad Cindy can be here too. My work. It's autobiographical. It's just to get at the stuff that I'm interested in. I'm very bad at writing about myself. I think there are 2 kinds of writers, one who can pretty much only write about himself or herself, and then the other kind, and I'm the other kind. I like a good story, and typically good stories are about characters who want stuff, and also if they're anxious, then the story might be funny. And if I'm not laughing, then I'm just setting those pages aside and trying something else. And I guess, yes, and I always paid attention to the news. I had a dad who was very attuned to, he had no education really, except as a civil engineer, but he thought about stuff, and dinner table conversation when I was growing up would be about what was happening in the world. So that just seemed natural, and also it's nice if you have a character who wants something to put that character in a recognizable world. And it just seems like, yeah, it's what I do. That was a sort of inarticulate response, but the articulate response would eat up the rest of our time.
Well, you're pretty articulate on the page, John.
Where it counts.
Where it counts. But you really do, I think, more than many American writers who are dealing perhaps with, plot-driven or shall we say, small domestic troubles. That there's a sense when you read Jonathan Franzen that you are reading something about this anxious age, something about a kind of loss of connectivity that we seem to have come to. At least that's what the critics say. What do you say from your perch about what you're trying to do?
Honestly, I am trying to be funny, and I find people who are anxious very funny because I feel that's the only way to survive my own anxiety is to step back and throw it into somebody else and then laugh at that person. So for instance, like in the corrections, I spent, so I'm always looking for a topic sentence. This is a little craft thing. I don't really have a character until I can write a good topic sentence about the character. It all goes back to what we were taught in 7th grade about topic sentences. It turns out to be really, really true. And it can take up to 5 years to come up with a topic sentence for a character for me. But there was a character in the corrections, Gary, who, and it was a rather elaborate topic sentence, but it basically had to do with there was all this attention in the 90s on clinical depression, which Prozac was the miracle cure for. And he was trying to demonstrate that he was not clinically, he was trying to do something in order to demonstrate to his wife that he was not clinically depressed. So that was very much of the time, and people were having conversations. Instead of saying, I wish you would take the trash out, or I wish you would clean up after dinner more, they would say, you have a problem, you're clinically depressed. And then the other person would say, no, I'm not clinically depressed, you're clinically depressed. And so it was hilarious, but those were real fights. And I had been in one myself. It was like, and yeah, so it's like, okay, well, now I've kind of got a handle on this guy. And yes, it does draw in what's happening in the world because why not? It's fun.
Right, right.
Yeah, I'm an entertainer. So I'm looking for what's fun.
So let me ask you now, talking about real life, because one of the things that I think would be really interesting to explore, particularly with your work, is the way that fiction in some ways gets across a reality better than sometimes nonfiction can. What does fiction, in your mind, how does it do that for a society? How does it feed us? How does it nurture us in that sense?
Well, I actually think the people who read Denis Johnson level fiction are the lucky ones. And I don't mean economically the lucky ones, I mean just lucky that something is going right if you can actually sustain attention. In a novel, if you're really, really miserable, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. And in the prison population, there are the readers, and those are the lucky ones. In any population, I think it's actually, so if you can enjoy a book, you should pause for a moment of gratitude that you're able to do that, because a lot of people can't. If you can enjoy a complicated, dark book that laughs at things other people might find terrible, then you're really, really lucky. But that is actually almost a definition of what we call literature, is that kind of cosmic distance on stuff. If you're really down in the trenches, you can't do that. Oh yeah, so I think I talk a lot about The Metamorphosis, Kafka's novel about Gregor Samsa, who wakes up one morning and finds that he's an insect. He could have done a memoir, sort of midstream memoirs, talking about how crappy it was to live at home with his parents and not even have the good bedroom, even though he was the son, and so forth. And this is a grown man. He's been working a job for years, and there he is at home with the parents. And he could have probably gotten across some of why he found that a drag.
Right.
But to get at really the degree to which he experienced that as unbelievably terrible, he made up a story. He invented something. And also in the process, good thing for fiction, he protected his family, because everyone knew that the Kafkas did not have a large bug for a son. So and the parents themselves go, oh, that's not us. How could that be us? Franz is a little weird, but he's not an insect. And I think that, broadly speaking, that's a metaphor for what fiction does, is it enables you to exaggerate in these wild ways that that mere representation of reality cannot, states of mind, emotional states, and lots of other kinds of states that mere factual representation simply cannot.
Yeah. Of course, that brings me, you're talking about the ways that fiction works. I mean, the humor in fiction, and which Denis used so superbly in the middle of the darkest, sort of funkiest moments. You would find it screamingly funny.
His word choice in A Fatal Accident, in the first story in Jesus' Son, even I think when the car crash happens, the woman says, no, the woman said viciously, like that word viciously, which is like a head-on crash is about to occur. Yeah, that tells me he had resolved something and could see it from the kind of perspective in which things, on the one hand, he's sort of touching close to God, and on the other hand, he's touching, it's all hilarious. Yeah. If you get the new story collection for no other reason, there's a 2.5-page scene of the narrator having a knee examination in surgical theater while tripping on LSD that if there's any doubt that he was a comic writer.
Yeah, in fact, you made a wonderful citation at his prize ceremony, and I want to read at least part of it. You said, his sentences at best are miracles of transparency and tone, which we've already heard, perfect in the way they inhabit the page, but devoid of vanity about their perfection, always vivid in their reference to the actual, but also always conveying something larger, their creator's own self-knowledge and compassion and sense of cosmic comedy. The God I want to believe in has a voice like Johnson's.
Right.
What is, yep.
Oh, I don't know. Stress on want to, as in wish I could. But yeah, if there were a God who spoke like, with that kind of, I'm not going to try to explicate that sentence.
Okay. Well, I think what it meant
thank you.
If I may.
You absolutely may.
Is that he really had a voice. I mean, a very strong voice. And it was, if we could pinpoint that talent, it would be that voice that he had. That was absolutely unique and original, as yours is, I would say.
Thank you.
That sense that you are in the hands of a really superb narrator, and you can't quite let go. It's mesmerizing, that voice.
Well, thank you.
Is that what you meant?
No, I was not talking about myself. I was talking about Denis. But yeah.
Yeah.
I thought actually Marilyn put it nicely, that there is a sense of a kind of unitary, that the writing and the person were almost indistinguishable. It strikes me, and I think the other two guests who will soon join me can speak to this. He's somebody who might very well not have survived. He was a kind of messed up kid, and had intimate knowledge with these, pretty violent and definitely addictive situations, and there is a sense of, at the core, I think, of all of his. I was rereading the new stories on the way down here, and the whole book kind of feels like a meditation, not a meditation, it's a representation of the amazingness of still being alive, so that there's something about everything he wrote that is aware of the proximity of death, and that goes to, in that respect, I think there's a kind of subterranean connection with Flannery O'Connor, who, in the greatest of all her great stories, Good Man is Hard to Find, she would have been a good woman if it had been somebody there to shoot her every day of her life. About the grandmother in that story, if you don't know the story, go read it, which is basically, this is a trivial woman who, with a gun pointed at her, suddenly found something. And somehow, throughout his career, he managed to write the stuff that felt right on that bubble of, there's a gun pointed at me. Death is all around me. I've seen people die. I'm aware that I'm going to die. And yeah, there's a line in the new book, I like my wife. She's, clever and rather attractive. She could die any minute. And then he just says that. It's like, and then new paragraph, and we're on to the rest of the story. But that seemed to me kind of the essence of the work. That's what makes it so exciting, is that there's always death right there.
Right there.
Yeah,
Yep.
right there.
Well, with death right there, let's bring on Elliot Ackerman. So here's a quote.
First of all, that might be my favorite introduction.
Here's a quote to accompany you, to have you accompany us as I did for John. This is from Ben Fountain, who wrote a wonderful book called Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, if you know it. And he wrote about Elliot this: Dark at the Crossing is every bit as taut and harrowing as the place it depicts, a region where 15 years of relentless war play out in filthy refugee camps and upscale shopping malls. Elliot Ackerman has written a brilliant, admirably merciless novel of broken lives, broken places, and good intentions gone awry. Someone once said of you, if I remember this correctly, that they don't award medals of valor for writing, but maybe they should to you. There's a sense, Elliot, in your books, both of them, that you have emerged from the cauldron of hell to tell the story. How, and this is going to make John's blood pressure rise, because I read somewhere that he hates this question, but I'm going to ask this question. How autobiographical are these stories, in the sense that you have lived through any, of course you've lived through the hell of war, but to what extent are these from life?
I mean, my first book is the story of an Afghan who's murdered by an American, but it's all told from the perspective of the Afghan, so that's not me. And my second novel takes place in southern Turkey around the Syrian Civil War, and it's a love story, but those characters aren't me. However, they're deeply informed by my experience, and I don't think I could extricate my experiences from the book.
Right. But there is a sense, I think, especially in Green on Blue, that you're not sure what side is which. It reminds me of revolutions in which the sides keep changing all the time because people see the battle's going this way, the battle's going that way, and they're going to run to whatever side is winning. There's that sense of divided loyalties or confused loyalties, and the fog of it all, in a sense, and that's clearly something that you've seen.
I mean, it's something that I've seen. It's something that I admire, in other people's writing. It's something I admired in Denis Johnson's writing. The ability to take extremely complex political events and make them feel extremely personal. And I think it's something that fiction does. But then you get talking about different sides of an issue, in a war. Like, for instance, there's the, what's the trope someone just said to me the other day, which is, maybe I said on television, you don't really know a person until you've been divorced from them. Which I think is, that's probably true. I would append to that, you don't really know a person until you've, fought on the opposite side of a war from them. And so I think there's sort of, sometimes people say, it's, why are you so, fascinated by the people on the other sides of these conflicts? Well, in some ways, they're the people that you know the best. And to, trot out another tired trope, write what you know. And oftentimes, you know them the best.
Right. But I assume that in particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan, you are fighting alongside people who are of that land and with whom you have to make bonds. I mean, there was one thing I think that you've said so eloquently is that a Marine is trained to kill, right? But he also has to be trained to love. And why? Because he has to throw himself in the line of fire for his buddy, for his compatriot, for the person he's fighting with. And that really interests me, that notion of, you're essentially falling in love with or loving a person whose life is at risk and who will die or may die.
Yeah, I think it gets to sort of the topic of our panel here, and what is very unique in Johnson's work is that he is so often, the edge, or I would say it's also almost like this extremely thin membrane that is translucent when you're standing there right up against issues, particularly issues of conflict, and wars. Where people are fascinated by that subject is, the difference between, love and violence is so permeable. And so, I found in my own experience, I have found my own experience in war. Some of the great ironies is that people, are doing very, very courageous things because they love one another, but the courageous things that they're doing are incredibly violent. And so again, you're constantly, flipping, we're permeating that membrane.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of membranes, the Darkness at the Crossing deals with an Iraqi who's actually born in Iraq, but he's an American citizen. And we can't help but wonder, as we read it, and he wonders it himself, where his loyalties lie, and what it means to be true to oneself when you have two identities at work, two nationalities at work, two loyalties. And how did you get to that subject, and how did that come to you?
Well, this character who's an Arab American basically decides he wants to go cross into Syria to fight for the Free Syrian Army. And a lot of the book is about unpacking his motivations, and actually kind of gets to what John was just saying with the Flannery O'Connor story, about needing the gun pointed at your head, which also reminds me of the great scene in Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket about Animal Mother, the machine gunner in the Marine platoon. They say, Animal Mother's a great guy. He just needs someone to throw hand grenades at him for the rest of his life. And so, this character, Harris Abadi, is kind of he's in the same position. But, and to be honest with you, the thing that was foremost in my mind wasn't anything that happened to me in the wars. It was actually the scene in Anna Karenina, and the way Anna Karenina ends. And so, anyway, spoiler alert, she throws herself in front of a train and commits suicide. But, I always felt like reading that book and getting taught that, Vronsky, her lover, kind of gets like a bad rap. I feel like, the world's been tough on Vronsky. And if you recall, the last you ever hear of Vronsky, he's been disgraced, he's an outcast from society now, but the last we hear is you don't even see Vronsky. You don't see Vronsky, you're just told by another character that Vronsky was last seen on a train heading to the Caucasus to rejoin his regiment. And they don't say why, and of course, he's on a train and just threw herself in front of a train. And, Tolstoy doesn't tell you the reasons. But it always fascinated me is, he could be going to rejoin his regiment because he thinks that some, battlefield heroics will be the way he can redeem himself and integrate again into society. Okay, or he could be going there to basically he could be on that train for the same reasons, as how Anna ended herself. He could be going off the war to kill himself. And you don't know, and you never get the answer from Tolstoy. I have always been fascinated that how, people can engage in one act, people can go to war for completely different, for reasons they don't even know to themselves. And it can be an act, a redemptive act, or it can be a destructive act. So that's something, that I was hoping to examine. Mm-hmm.
Well, you as Denis did in Tree of Smoke, that sense of, the complete sort of suspension in a kind of wild card situation.
And like in Angels, which is one of my favorite books of his, you have this sort of kind of, it's not banal, but it seems very everyday. It opens on a bus. I mean, there's a guy, is meeting a woman on a bus. She's got a kid. And by you get to the end of it, you're in the middle of a bank robbery. Mm-hmm. And the way he could just sort of slip you from the banal into the very, very violent and put you in situations you kind of can't imagine that you're in, I think was the wonderful thing he did in his work, and I aspired to do in my work, particularly when you're dealing with violence, because the thing we often forget about violence is it is so banal.
Right. Dealing with violence, it seems to me, it's so physical, it's so concrete, and it's all around you, and yet, and you deal with these war situations. But you also said at one point, Elliot, you actually quote Faulkner, in which you say he said, the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself. That being the conflict, not being the conflict that's around you concretely and possibly threatening your life. It seems what interests you more is the internal conflict that is going on, even as that conflict is happening.
Well, I think it's a thing that interests most people. Characters are interesting. It's once you start getting into, you were talking before about, what does fiction do? Fiction takes you into the internal lives of these people, and I think that's where the most compelling stories arise, and that's where, the emotion exists. Why write fiction? I think, if you are able to make someone feel something, they'll remember what they felt in a way they might not, remember what they read in the paper that morning.
Mm-hmm. One last question for you, and that is, you're a warrior. On
my good days.
And, warriors come home, and things happen. And do we, and I'm trying to take this out to a more social or political question, if you will. Why do we revere warriors? We revere warriors from afar. When they come home, when they are riddled with problems, when they may be addicted to drugs or beating their wives, or as a female beating her husbands, or not being good to the children, how Why is it that we're not so good at confronting those issues that they bring home?
Well, I think in some respects it's easy, at that point to look at them as the other. I've often, and I think probably most people who have my background have had the experience of, someone saying to them, like, I could never imagine what you went through. I'm like, yeah, you can. Like, sure you can. Like, maybe you've like passed by a car accident, or, you've lost someone in your own family. But I think at the same time, like saying, I can never imagine what you went through, it like always has unsettled me. Not only because it kind of shows like, because it puts up some like lack of, empathy. It's like, if you can never imagine what I went through or what someone went through in this, what you're basically saying is that, like, I have been so inalterably changed, or one has been so inalterably changed by an experience that you can no longer identify with them. It's like, so if you can't understand what I went through, it means I have been so inalterably changed that I can never go back to being the person I was before I left. If I can never go back to being the person I was before I left, it in effect means I can never come home.
Right.
And that's, that's somewhere we just can't be.
Right.
So I think that, that maybe the answer to your question is, just a general lack of empathy and a lack of being able to, see ourselves collectively, in these wars.
Right, right. And with that, I want to bring on Sam Quinones, who deals with issues of post. And here's what I want to read about Sam. This was written by Laura Miller at Slate. Many nonfiction books are padded magazine features, but Dreamland, the three-pronged story of how heroin addiction became epidemic in small-town America, is the book Quinones had to quit his job at the LA Times to write. You won't find the story better told anywhere else, from the economic hollowing out of the middle class to the greedy, reckless marketing of pharmaceutical opiates to the remarkable entrepreneurial industry of the residents of the obscure Mexican state of Nayarit. All of these factors combine to create an opiate-addicted population in small American cities like Portsmouth, Ohio, where residents priced out of pill mills turn to a new and newly cheap high. Dreamland, true crime, sociology, and expose illuminates a catastrophe unfolding all around us right now. Sam, you covered the border, you've covered the US-Mexico relations, you've been a Latin American correspondent for many, many years. At what point did the opioid crisis get your attention?
Well, I began a story about, when I was at the LA Times, about a small town in Mexico where everybody comes to the United States to sell heroin like pizza. So there's a delivery system where you call a number, and then the operator takes your order and then dispatches someone to meet you, and it's basically Domino's pizza of heroin. And I came upon it when I was talking with a guy from the DEA in Columbus who said, we've got this system here, we've got these guys doing this, we've never seen this before. No guns, they don't use guns, and we can arrest them, they send up more people, they reconstitute like some kind of mutant very quickly. And he said, they're all from the same town. And that, I had lived in Mexico for 10 years, and I had written a lot about, you see this a lot across Mexico, where towns where people do one job. And there's one town in my first book where everybody in the town makes popsicles. One of the great businesses, businesses for arriving at the middle class in Mexico is the popsicle business, and there's a business, if you know Mexico, Paleteria La Michoacana is everywhere, and that's one town started that. And you go to the town, and there's in the front of the town, there's a 2-story concrete popsicle statue saying thank you to the popsicle for bringing them into the middle class. So when he told me that, I knew he was right. I knew there had to be a town out there. He didn't know which one. He said it was Tepic, Nayarit. I knew it was not Tepic. Tepic is a capital city, 350,000 people of the state of Nayarit. I knew that could not be true. It had to be a small town, so I began to write to guys he had arrested in around federal prison. And one after another, I wrote 20, 30 letters to these guys. Hey, do you want to talk about your pizza heroin system? You know, basically is what I did. And one guy kind of got back to me and says, yeah, we're not from Tepic. We're from a little town called Jalisco, and we all are heroin traffickers. And I thought at the time it was just Columbus, because that's where I first encountered this. And then he began to say, oh, no, we're all over the country. And I could not explain a few things about that. First of all, they sold black tar heroin, and my understanding, my knowledge of black tar heroin was fairly extensive at that point. And black tar heroin was really, for many years, only on the western side of the United States. And now they were selling in Columbus and really in West Virginia and places in Tennessee, places like that. And he began to tell all the cities where they were located now, and they had moved to Charlotte, and they had moved to Lexington and Cincinnati and Memphis and Nashville and Indianapolis, et cetera, et cetera. All these different towns on the eastern side of the United States. I could not explain why that would be that heroin traffickers would have such big business and such a new market. I thought heroin was this old thing that no one really messed with anymore. Everybody knew it was a disaster. So why would you actually mess around with heroin? Why would there be huge new numbers of people buying this drug and using this drug? And that's really what got me onto the larger story, which is the pain pills and the opioids as we know them today. But it was really an attempt to understand why Mexican heroin traffickers, particularly from this one town where I went, I interviewed eventually a dozen or so, maybe 10 or 12 guys who were traffickers who were all in federal prison from this town. And it was a way, but I understood them to be the vanguard of this, that they were the spear really under finding the market that was then going to explode, which has now happened. But they found this market. They knew what was going to happen back in 1998, 99, 2000, what's happening today all across the country, basically.
Could you tell us a little bit about the scale? You testified in Congress not long ago, and I watched the whole hearing. It was absolutely fascinating, and I recommend it. Opioids kill people every day in a scale, I think you said in the hearing that more people are killed by opiates than by car accidents in this country. Tell us about the scale that we're talking about, the scale.
The scale is quite stunning, I think. Yes, I mean, it must have been one of the great moments, or the fascinating moments I describe in my book, is when two public health folks from the state of Ohio realize that there is about to be a historic shift. Since in modern America, the automobile has always been the leading cause of accidental death. There has never been a time when, and now of course that's gotten better. You know, we've gotten safer, you know, better cars, et cetera. So that number was coming down. But in 2007, two public health people at the state of Ohio figured out that that was going to end, and that there was now in the state of Ohio first, that overdoses, mostly to narcotic pain pills, but to some degree heroin at that point, was overtaking and was going to be the #1 cause of death. And that wasn't true in Ohio in 2007, and then it was true nationally the next year. And it's a stunning thing. I think it's also very much an undercount, because this story begins and is most intensely felt in states with too many counties. And too many counties, like Kentucky has 120 counties for 4 million people. Ohio has 88 counties for 11 million people. West Virginia has 55 counties for less than 2 million people. And the reason that's important is because this is not like, I was a crime reporter, started my career in the crack days. And crack was very public. Everything about it was public. You couldn't avoid it. It was on the streets, the drive-by shootings, the gangs were going very wealthy and violent and armed. Homicide rates went up, and the violence was horrible, and it destroyed neighborhoods, and none of that was happening with this. In fact, crime rates were dropping as overdose rates were rising. And so you have this kind of transformation of what you normally think of as very quiet, right? the doctors were the source of supply. I mean, this really starts with narcotic painkillers, not heroin. The traffickers come later. So it's really a source of supply is doctors, pharmaceutical companies, American patients demanding to be fixed, in a sense. And so, and at the same time, you have parents and families wanting to hide the fact that their kids are addicted. Nobody wants to be recognizing that the obituaries are almost all fabrications and so on. So the only place you're going to find this, the place where we're going to recognize this, is the coroner's office, bodies. But the problem is, in these small counties, in these states with too many counties, the counties we fund coroner's offices mistakenly, I believe, based on county tax base. And so these coroner's offices are small, they're underfunded frequently, they don't have enough doctors in these areas, and they're susceptible to family influence. So, you know, doc, don't put that in the death report because it's going to look bad for my dad or my brother or my child or what have you. And so what's happening today is really, I believe, like an enormous plague across the country, certainly in large parts of the country. It's very, very intensely felt. That is consuming families, consuming neighborhoods, consuming football teams. Football is really basically now a gateway to heroin addiction in America, in my opinion. And it's also destroying those areas that, in order for those areas to be great again, a lot of these areas to be great, they have to defeat this problem because nobody is actually going to go put a factory in some areas where half the population can't pass a drug test, you know. And so the effect is massive, but also for a long time it really unseen. When my book came out, the health policy advisor for Hillary Clinton called me and said, Hillary is stunned. This was 2015. She's in Iowa and she's in New Hampshire, and she's stunned by the ferocity with which she is seeing parents come to her and say, we need a solution. They didn't care about almost anything else, right? And I said yes, because first of all, this is a topic that polls poorly. You're never going to get somebody to admit on the phone that this is their most important subject, right? They want to hide it, but go out there, hug people, be a mother to people. They need that. And you know, there are probably a lot of reasons she lost, but she wrote a policy position paper, and that was, you know. So my feeling is this is a very hidden, even today, even though the awareness is much greater than it ever has been. Even today, it's still we're seeing these icebergs, and really down below is a massive issue that's everywhere in the country.
Veterans in pain, or people in recreational as well? I mean, it seems to do the gamut, the spectrum.
Right, but it's all, yes, sure, but it's all connected to this idea that took hold in the mid-1990s that promoted by pain specialists and by pharmaceutical companies, and really eagerly accepted by us, American health consumers, that narcotic painkillers were now known to be virtually non-addictive when used to treat pain. And therefore, the dangerous corollary to all that was it doesn't matter how many of these pills you get prescribed. And you probably have gone, many of you I'm sure have gone in for a surgery, the pain for which is going to last, 2 or 3 days, you get 30 days worth of pills, right? Well, you multiply that by millions of Americans every year for 20 years, and what you get is a massive supply that has created, therefore, a massive black market. And so you get kids going to parties and saying, hey, the quarterback and the high school football team has taken them, so, well, damn, I'll take them. I mean, most of the addiction is related, in my opinion, to supply. I used to believe that our addiction problems were due to demand. When you're in Mexico, it's nice to believe that. Mexicans want to believe that. It helps them kind of wash their hands of our binational drug problem. Well, it's those gringos up there, they just want their dope. Well, the truth is not that. I was convinced of that when I was living in Mexico. Now I'm not. I'm convinced now that it's a supply issue, and most drug problems are. You unleash a vast, people come to me and say, should we legalize drugs now that you've written this book? And I'm like, well, what about this story makes you believe we ought to legalize drugs? Yeah. All of this is due to illegal drugs. You unleash a vast, very potent supply of legal drugs on the population, and you will get massive problems, you know. And it was a time of fantasy, you know. I often point out these were years too when we believed that many we believed kind of we were special and therefore the old rules don't apply to us, you know. And so these were years, you know, when we believed it was very common for numerous baseball players to hit more than 60 home runs. It had happened twice, you know, and it had not happened since they cracked down on steroids, right? We believe that if you package all these non-performing, nasty home loans into one security, and Standard & Poor's stamps that thing AAA, that's a magnificent place to put your money. And we believe that you massively prescribe narcotics derived from the opium poppy, that would not create some, you know, an enormous new population of drug addiction. And very much unlike the subjects of Denis Johnson, these are mainstream people. I had a drug addict tell me, dude, I stopped using. It was enough to get me to stop using to watch when the football players and the cheerleaders got addicted. Because he was a punk rocker. He didn't want to be, he went to heroin because it was like this outside kind of thing, rebel kind of thing. Now it's very much mainstream.
This is what I was going to point out. In one of the short stories in Largesse of the Sea Maiden, which was just published posthumously by Random House, a wonderful book, absolutely marvelous book of short stories. In many ways, I think a culmination of Denis's talent. He writes about a jailbird's ability to get high on the most unexpected of substances. At one point, somebody brings in a newspaper soaked in LSD, and everybody just thinks, well, that's a newspaper, except that it's, you know, it's satisfying. This is a very different thing that you're describing. This is not. This is it's jumped to.
This is almost entirely
fence.
white people. This is it starts in Appalachia and the Rust Belt, which of course are areas we're very eager to ignore and did ignore. But by the time I got onto the story, really it had spread far, far beyond that. It really had spread across America and had spread really stunningly, in my opinion, to some of the very nicest suburbs. Orange County is like our heroin beltway in LA now, you know. Some of the nicest suburbs where people had done best in the economic expansions of the previous, say, 20 or 30 years. It was in those areas, I've always thought it was stunning, that in those areas people were getting addicted and dying from drugs used to numb pain. Like you look at their lives and you go, like, what pain exactly do you feel? It is a perfect life. In the history of the world, 0.00001% have lived as well, of the people ever to exist have lived as well as you. And you got to, you know, use these drugs to, but I mean, I think that's kind of the story that I initially believed that I was writing the great American drug trafficking story. I was a crime reporter. That's really all I wanted to do. You know, I write about Mexico and all that crime and gangs, all this stuff. And then I began to realize, no, well, yes, this is certainly that story, but there's a whole lot more to it. There's this isolate. Really, what it comes down to is not economics. How do you say a Rust Belt town in Charlotte, North Carolina, have the same problem and make it an economic? It's not an economic story. What it really has to do with, I believe, my common denominator, with the best I can come up with, is our own deep and profound isolation and our destruction of community, which is why I chose this swimming pool in a small town called Portsmouth, Ohio, on the Ohio River, for the metaphor, really, or the central image of the book. The name of the pool was Dreamland, and the pool was a place where everyone came together and grew up, and it was a steel mill and shoe factories and bustling Main Street and all that, and 50,000 people, and the pool was where they all came together and formed community. And then, of course, the steel mill leaves, the shoe factories leave, the Main Street just empties out, classic fashion, half the town leaves, And then everyone retreats indoors, and finally they can't sustain it, and they dig up and destroy Dreamland and replace it with a strip mall and an O'Reilly's Auto Parts store as the anchor tenant. And then they become exposed, not unlike, I believe, the Indians when the Europeans brought smallpox. You know, they just became, they had no bulwark, community bulwark to keep this at bay, and I think that is what we're dealing with now in a deeper sense, kind of with this opioid epidemic that is, coast to coast.
This is what struck me about your hearing, and I want to bring John into this because you said in the hearing that it was at that point where, families from all kinds of classes and would get together and mix, and this was their, the community coming together and a kind of a real connectedness there. And so much of what John writes about is a kind of disconnected, where you're reeling out of connection, really, because either your marriage is falling apart, the economy has gone bust, and you don't have a job in the mining town. So my question is, and this is a Pollyanna question, I admit, fix the malaise, fix the problem, fix this disconnectedness. John, what do you think? And you start to war, because I think you actually said in the hearing, Sam, you said, you got to get back to that. You got to get back to that connection. You've got to get back to that community. Right. What do you think, John?
I would respectfully disagree that I write about dysfunctional families. I think that dysfunctional families are likely to be found where there is a substance. Mm-hmm. I, in fact, write about highly functional families. The kids are all well taken care of. They're not dropped on their head. There are, in fact, no serious drug addictions. And yeah, I'm an old leftist, and I actually think that, it's just we've been ground between the twin grinding plates of consumerism and kind of, which is an atomizing force. It makes the individual consumer the most important thing. And in fact, I would actually flip it around and say the reason I'm writing about families is I think of the family as the one thing you can't, that no matter how hard the two plates grind, you can't actually dissolve the family bond. So if you're interested in psychological intensity in a novel, which is kind of catnip for me, you're naturally drawn to the family, because that's like one of the few places you can find it. You're not going to find it necessarily at the community level or even at the friendship level because of this. So yeah, I do think that this, and then of course, corporate pharmaceutical forces, and then all of those things you were mentioning, and then the financial industry. The worst of capitalism is kind of piling on to make these things worse.
And I think heroin's interesting to me because it dawns on me that is, kind of piggyback on what you're saying, is that is, if you are a culture that believes that stuff will buy you happiness, well then the final stuff that could potentially buy you happiness is this cruddy stuff that you inject in your vein. I mean, that's a final expression
and you're on the hedonic
of that philosophy of living.
And you're on the hedonic treadmill. It's like you got
precisely. It's
you
never
say
really happiness.
You're never
no, of
there's
course.
Never
and it makes you feel like you've attained it for a moment. Until then, you haven't attained it anymore. You got to get back. And what I found interesting, frankly, was that the same guys, the Mexican guys I was writing about, they never used their dope. They would use cocaine, they would drink, but they never used their dope. But they were also addicted. They were addicted to, as poor young men, leaving home. Being poor in Mexico is not just about having not very much money, it's also being humiliated for not having very much money. Mm-hmm. They would come home with money, and that was their narcotic. They would accumulate, one of the things that they loved to accumulate was Levi's 501 jeans, and because those were the classic, the rural gold standard for rural menswear in Mexico. When I was there, for sure, was Levi's 501 jeans. They would bring them, and and all the addicts would bring them jeans for their dopes, trade them dope for the jeans for the dope. They'd take the jeans home and give them away like Santa Claus. But all these guys who they'd grown up with, all the girls want to talk to them. All these men would come to them and ask for loans. Well, you don't get asked for a loan. That's a good thing. You don't get asked for loans unless you have money to be actually given. And so there's this feeling throughout the research that I had that everybody was kind of addicted to something, but it was not. They were looking for happiness, and the truth is, happiness doesn't. This is pleasure. Happiness doesn't come from that, but it's all that consumer culture that you're referring to. I think a very, very big part of our life today.
Yeah, it's almost like it actually is reminding me of something that Denis wrote, that sort of vulture feeling, certainly. It's his journalism in Liberia.
Thanks.
And I can't remember if this was for Esquire magazine or what it was for, but he was describing this tremendously nightmarish war in which the dogs are looking very prosperous and the people are starving. And the reason why the dogs are looking so prosperous is, of course, because they're feeding on the corpses. I don't know why, and it's a very, very dark image. But it suggests to me, and Elliot maybe could comment to this, that it's almost a metaphor that in the consumer business, and also in the business of war, that there are corpses all about. There are people dying. This is a crisis that, I mean, I just in the newspaper today, this headline, nearly 1 million people, nearly 1 million Americans are not working because they're too sick from opioids. Last year it was 70,000 people dead. The year before that it was 64,000 people dead, more than the Vietnam War. There is this sense of, the industry devouring, almost in a sort of warlike way, these victims, and there seems to be a failure afoot of responsibility, in the sense that, I mean, what could we have done? Where could we stop it? What can we do now? A little bit of a war scene, I would think. Elliot?
Help us out here, Elliot.
Yeah, sorry. I think definitely. I think wars build their own economies. I'm sure you've seen this in your reporting, and I think we have a conventionally American conception of war as though a war begins, it's fought for a cause, and then it ends, and somebody wins and somebody loses. Well, the reason we're in our 17th year, for instance, of fighting in Afghanistan is not because we haven't found like that perfect bit of alchemy to, defeat the Taliban or whoever we've decided our enemy is. It's because you start to get into a cycle where the war just feeds upon itself. And why is it feeding upon itself? And, one part can be, the internal dynamics in Afghanistan or in Iraq and all of those reasons that we feel are very, very far away. But I think if we turn the light on ourselves, it's also because every war you go to war with a construct. Whether it was the national mobilization that existed in the Second World War, where the entire country got behind the effort, to the draft of the Vietnam War, to today, where we are fighting wars that are resourced with an all-volunteer military, and they're funded through deficit spending. So kind of like, you're painkillers, you don't feel a thing. And it goes on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
Sam, is it your impression that that these are, you say it's about supply, that seems to imply that these are people who, if they hadn't happened to have access to the opioids, they would have had good, successful, satisfying lives?
Yeah, it's hard to say. You're right.
So,
I don't know.
I mean, because
Right.
the mention of Afghanistan puts me, and there is this, as I said, there's this, we were talking backstage, there was an overlap between areas of, certainly where the opioid crisis first made itself particularly visible, and Trump America. that there's a kind of despair and a sort of let's just burn it all down quality, and that's absolutely what happens if you tear up a country with 17 years of war. I mean, there's like, why not keep fighting?
But there's also the sense in what you were talking about too, which was this, this fantasia that we're living in, where, oh yes, we can have, opioid drugs and be fine. But it's also the sense of, oh yeah, we can hollow out our institutions and we'll all be psychologically okay. Like, oh yeah, we can just, resource our wars out to other people and not pay taxes on them, and yeah, that's going to work out fine. Like, it was a good thing that we had a draft in the 60s, and it was,
I totally believe that.
And then everybody, got to a certain point, like, makes no sense, we're not doing it anymore. And now, you just don't have it.
Exactly, 100%. I've said this, in fact, in talks that I've been giving around the country about this, that it's like, we just have this, like, the whole theme, really, is, to me, I thought, again, it was drug trafficking. That's not that. It's isolation versus community. We used to treat pain in a variety of ways. One person would get a variety of approaches. So it'd be, you have pain, chronic pain, well, cognitive behavioral therapy, diet, swimming, pain, marital counseling. You need that. The marriage is pain. So, seriously, that's what they would. That's why part of what it was went into. But then the pills took up all the. We began to believe in easy answers to complicated problems. We began to have. I told an audience the other day. I can't remember where it was now. That one of the worst things we ever did was go to war and then give ourselves a tax cut. It's like we didn't really. This one infinitesimal part of our population was going to ask to go over there and risk their lives to fight our war, and we were not supposed to feel anything. We just all wanted to be narcotized. We all wanted to be kind of immune. And what's very, very important in all this, I believe, very important, is that we were not asked to be accountable, and not with pain either. We were not asked to say, when you have chronic pains, very often it has to do with your own personal consumer decisions. You don't get enough exercise, you eat poorly, you smoke, you drink, a variety of things. Doctors found the patients didn't want to hear that, and so they just said, Doc, I want you to fix me. You're the car mechanic, my body's a car, fix me, And we got into this attitude that I believe was also very kind of just a narcotized attitude, that we don't want to have to deal with our own decisions. We don't, or change our way of living. And part of it was when we went to war and were happy to get a tax cut. To me, one of the lowest points in our culture, frankly, was right there. Really, it was a very sad day, I thought.
Before we move on to the last segment of this program, I want to thank these extraordinary writers who, in one way or another, speak to, I think, Denis Johnson's work, his miraculous ability to take so many themes that we've talked about here and merge them into the spectacular literature. So thank you to Jonathan Franzen, thank you to Elliot Ackerman, thank you to Sam Quinones. Before we move on to the next part of the program, the very tail end, thank you so much, gentlemen. Now, to tell us about the more personal side of Denis Johnson, I want to welcome Elizabeth Cuthrell to come and talk about her personal recollections and her work in film with Denis. Elizabeth, please.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. I think I'm going to usher in a different tone. I hope that's okay. I first met Denis in 1997 when my partners and I were writing the screenplay for Jesus' Son. We were just starting out in the film business. It was our first project. I was a huge fan of Denis's work, and I had somehow convinced him in a phone call to let us take a whack at the script. I promised him if he hated it, we wouldn't make the movie, and he knew I meant it. We sent him the first draft, he loved it, and asked to come to New York City to meet us. He ambled into the meeting wearing a vintage Aloha shirt, red cowboy boots, and Elvis Presley glasses held together in the middle by tape. I was terrified and thrilled to meet this genius whose book we were adapting. He seemed shy and amused at the same time, but what I remember most was his generosity. He marveled at our adaptation and talked to us like we were the geniuses and he was the kid just starting out. I asked him if he'd be willing to play a part in the film, and he said, "Only if I can play Terrence Weber, the guy with the knife in his eye." He added, "That way, if I hate the movie, I can use my performance as a metaphor." So, a year later, we were on the film set together. Denis was effusive. He kept saying, "This is exactly what it looked like. This is exactly what it felt like." In the clip we're about to show you, Jack Black and Billy Crudup are working in the ER of a hospital. They've raided the medicine cabinet, and they are hammered on just a cocktail of uppers and downers when a guy named Terrence Weber, played by Denis Johnson, arrives. Here's the clip.
I'd been working in the emergency ward for about 3 weeks, I guess. I'd taken the job because Michelle was pregnant, and I was trying to be responsible. I had nothing to do on the overnight shift, so I went looking for Georgie, the orderly. He often stole pills from the cabinet.
What am I gonna do about these fucking shoes, man? Whatever you stole, I guess you ate it already, right? Listen to how they squish. Let me just check your pockets, okay? All right. Yeah. Right? No. Oh, yeah, I hear something. Yeah.
I hope you didn't do this to him.
Me? No, he was like this.
My wife did it.
Who brought you in?
Nobody. I just walked down. It's only 3 blocks.
All right, we better get you lying down.
Okay, I feel ready for something like that.
Name?
Terrence Weber.
Your face is dark. I can't see what you're saying. Georgie, what are you saying, man? I can't see.
What's going on, Georgie?
His face is dark.
How long ago did this happen?
Just a while ago, my wife did it. I was peeping on the lady next door while she was bathing. My wife waited till I fell asleep, and then she decided she'd blind me.
Do you want me to call the police?
Not unless I die.
Here's the situation. We need to get a team here, an entire team. I want a good eye man, the best eye man, a great eye man. I want a brain surgeon, and I want a really good gas man. Get me a genius. I'm not touching that head. We'll prep him, we'll prep this guy, and we'll just sit back and we'll sit tight. All right. Orderly. Orderly.
Do you mean me? Should I get him prepped?
Is this a hospital? Is this the emergency room? Is that the patient? Are you the orderly?
Collaborating with Denis on his stuff was like stepping into another world. Something in me would always get rearranged, opened, challenged. We worked on a bunch of projects together over the years, and we're cooking up some new ideas right up until the end. Denis was fierce about protecting his work. If someone tried to change or cut or wrongly interpret his writing, he would be crushed. But he would also do what he had to do to protect it. At a production of one of his plays in Chicago, he arrived for the final dress rehearsal and was stunned to realize the director decided to use this kind of sound machine to weave a creepy, weird background sound into the production. Denis hated it. He spoke to the director and producer, but they wouldn't budge. So, as a last desperate measure, that night, after everyone had left, he snuck back into the theater, stuck the sound machine under his jacket, went out, and pitched it into the river. Needless to say, he was locked out of the theater from then on. In his writing, Denis could be merciless, but as a friend, he was profoundly kind. He saw into you, but he didn't judge you, and when you made a bad choice, he'd help you find something heroic about it. He was awake and aware, and in my opinion, hooked up to some sacred line. There were no layers on him. He felt everything, every infirmity, in detail and at the speed of light, and that can't be easy. But whenever I asked him how he was, he would always say, "I'm getting better and better every day." And in one of our very last email exchanges, he wrote, "I thought late life was supposed to be boring. I'm finding it more like a trip over Niagara Falls." He sometimes sent me emails that read like prayers. Here's one. "Elizabeth, my darling sister, the other night I was up for a couple of hours around 2 a.m. I call it the night watch. Sometimes it's the best part of the day. I had an insight that I wish I could have held on to, that everything is renewed, replenished, perpetually, and that's what we are, that replenishing. I'm not the one being renewed. I'm the renewing itself. I'm not the one being healed. I'm the process of healing. That's the true me. I felt it, this truth, vividly. I was living it for a little while. Now it's just a concept again, but a sweet one, and here I pass it on to you." Denis's openness and sensitivity sometimes made it hard for him to deal with the rest of us, and especially the crazy business side of art. He told me when he was out in LA trying to get work made not long after Tree of Smoke came out, how he got a kick out of all the insane Hollywood bullshitters who would forget his name but proudly introduce him to each other as Dave and say, "This is Dave. He won the National Book Award." These kinds of experiences encouraged him to retreat back to Idaho or Arizona and earn his reputation as being reclusive. But there was something about the process of making plays, screenplays, and teleplays that brought out a part of Denis that was jazzed and collaborative and social, and he couldn't stay away from. And he loved actors. He would sometimes go into ecstatic states listening to them make sense of his work. Here's part of an email he wrote after a rehearsal. "Elizabeth, what a privilege to sit in a room and watch these geniuses at work. Afterwards, they talk about their dinner plans, head for an hour's subway ride, go on as if it's possible to go on after an experience like that. I go back to the apartment, 10-minute walk, and try not to dissolve into the galaxies." Lastly, I want to talk just for a moment about Denis's wife, Cindy Leigh Johnson, because there's really no talking about Denis without talking about Cindy. She was his beloved, and when he spoke about her and their kids, their beautiful daughter Lana, who's here tonight, it was truly like he was channeling sunlight. Cindy took care of everything the world demanded of Denis so he could make art. She was his buoy. Denis could be impulsive with money, and he told me that once Cindy took over the checkbook, the repo man stopped coming for his car. He'd always say, "I don't know how she does it. Does she clip coupons, buy everything at a fire sale?" She dazzled him. He never seemed to get over how her love transformed his life. Denis would say things like, "When Cindy goes somewhere, even for a short while, it's like God has died. This is my last story. I remember one afternoon when Dennis was giving a talk at the New School in New York City. It was a rare appearance, totally sold out, standing room only. It was raining and he got there late. Someone appeared and rushed him through a side door and up onto the stage, and he got separated from Cindy. Another writer was introducing him and going on a bit long with accolades, and I noticed Dennis on stage looking agitated. When he finally got to the mic, he put his hand to his forehead to shade the bright light, and the first thing he said was, "Cindy Lee, honey, where are you?" And she raised her arm and called back, "I'm here." And he smiled his incredible boyish smile at the sound of her voice, and he said, "I can't see you. Is your seat okay? Where are you? Can you stand up?" And she stood up and said, "Yes, I'm okay. I'm here." And they smiled at each other and flirted, and he said, "All right then," and began to read a story. All right then. It is my great honor to introduce my precious friend, Cindy Leigh Johnson.
Good evening. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you to all the panel members. What a wonderfully unusual tribute. I love it. I also want to thank all the ladies and gentlemen of the Library of Congress for bestowing the esteemed Prize for American Fiction upon my beloved husband. He so richly deserves it. When I met Dennis, he was 39 years old, and I immediately recognized him as the best-looking man in the world. I fell in love straight away. Only later did I realize he was the best writer in the world, in my humble opinion. But he was also this brave pilgrim soul who traveled the planet, from searching for pirates in the Sulu Sea to being the last American in Somalia when the UN withdrew. And consider this from a letter he wrote in 1991. "Dear Astronaut Selection Officer, I am a civilian who would like to be considered for the one-year astronaut training program." That's right, he tried to go into space. He was like a modern-day Tom Sawyer. Often he would embark with just a fishing vest, filled with everything he imagined he might need, and a faith that he would encounter helpers, teachers, and guides along his path. And he always did. His life was a grand adventure. He loved this world. He loved his family. And he loved his work. I am so grateful to have his work. His light shines through in his writing, and it's a gift to the world. But oh, how I miss that man. I will always love him. And so to close, a slideshow. I believe it will bear out my best-looking man in the world comment. Also, please keep an eye out for that fishing vest. Thank you.
We were born before the wind, also younger than the sun. And the bonnie boat was one as we sail into the mystic. I can now hear the sailors cry, smell the sea and feel the sky. Let your soul and spirit fly into the mystic. And where that foghorn blows, I will be coming home. Yeah, when the foghorn blows, I wanna hear it. I don't have to fear it, and I wanna rock your gypsy soul, just like way back in the days of old. And magnificently we will fold into the mystic. When that foghorn blows, you know I will be coming home. And when that foghorn whistle blows, I gotta hear it, I don't have to fear it, and I wanna rock your gypsy soul, just like way back in the days of old. And together we will fold into the mystic. Come on, girl.
Thanks so much, Cindy, for helping us end this celebration on such a personal and powerful note. I'm Rob Casper. I'm the head of the Poetry and Literature Center here at the library, and I would like to call Cindy and Elizabeth and all of the participants from tonight back out onto the stage. So please come on out, Cindy and Elizabeth. Please join me in thanking them again for an amazing, amazing night. Thanks to all of you for coming. If you want to leave with a few more books in your hand, our presenters will be signing books next door in the Woodall Pavilion. Before you go to get as many books as you can, though, we ask that you please fill out the survey that you got when you first walked in the door. You can drop them off in the back. We hope to see you here in just a few weeks' time for our Poet Laureate Spring event. Until then, have a good night, and again, thank you for coming out.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.